Welcome to the Deep Dive, the show engineered to take your most complex research sources and distill them into potent, actionable insight. Today, we are undertaking a deep and really necessary examination of defensive cryptography. Now, when most people hear crypto, they immediately think encryption, secrecy.
Right, keeping things hidden.
Exactly. But our mission today is different. We are going beyond mere confidentiality to explore the essential guardrails, the practical, high-stakes stuff needed for daily security, how you actually store credentials, how you manage keys, and critically, how you make sure the data itself hasn't been messed with. Integrity.
That's right. We're sort of leaving the beautiful theory of ciphers behind for a bit and focusing squarely on the demanding but absolutely critical work of defensive programming.
Okay.
This means diving into the mechanics of why just hashing a password isn't good enough, how you verify that your data hasn't been silently corrupted somewhere along the line, and why security is ultimately an architectural challenge, not just, picking the right algorithm. The goal is to get that deep knowledge fast.
Yes. So if we're moving from theory to practice, where do we kick off? It seems like, historically anyway, that front door, the authentication part, that's where things often go wrong first, leading to some pretty spectacular failures down the line.
Yeah, that makes sense. It's often the first line of defense.
Okay, let's unpack this then. We'll begin with Section 1, the weakest link hashing and credential protection.
Right. The initial phase, just managing user logins, it's filled with failures, often stemming from some really basic misunderstandings. One of the oldest fallacies was this idea that just encrypting your password file made it secure.
It sounds almost laughably naive looking back, but yeah, for a long time, many systems ran on the assumption that if they used some kind of reversible encryption on the stored passwords, maybe hiding the key somewhere nearby, they were safe. Because, decrypting the whole file without the key was seen as computationally impossible, or at least very hard.
And that assumption, it was often spectacularly wrong. The critical point is attackers rarely need to decrypt the entire file. They just need one working password to get a foothold.
Right. Just one way in.
Think back to that classic anecdote you find in the sources. An attacker gets hold of an encrypted password file. Did they try to crack the master encryption key? No.
Yeah, too much work.
Exactly. They just ran a brute force dictionary attack against the encrypted entries themselves,
Right.
Guessing common passwords, encrypting the guess, and seeing if it matched anything in the file. And boom, they quickly found that one engineer's password, I think one account named him Stephen Kramer, was just Janice.
Just Janice. So the implication is, if the encryption itself is weak or the key gets found, or maybe the encryption is so simple you can just encrypt guesses and compare, well, then the secrecy is basically useless against guessing common words.
Precisely. That's why the thinking shifted from encrypting passwords to hashing them. The main idea behind a cryptographic hash algorithm, like the principles and strong ones SHA-256, SHA-3, is to create a unique, fixed-size fingerprint, a digest, that represents the password, but crucially can't be reversed to get the password back.
And these hashes rely on those key properties to be secure, don't they? There were 3, I think.
Absolutely. The first is collision resistance. It should be practically impossible to find 2 different passwords that hash to the exact same output.
Okay.
The second is pre-image resistance. If you have a password and it's hash, you shouldn't be able to find another different password that hashes to that same value.
Got it.
And the third, probably the most critical for password security, is that it's a one-way street. Easy to go from password to hash, computationally infeasible to go backwards from the hash to the password.
What's fascinating here, though, is that even if a hash function is perfect in those ways, just doing a simple raw hash of a password still fails badly in practice for storage. Why is that?
Yeah, it comes down to speed. It's
Yeah.
ironic, right? Hash algorithms like the older message digest 5, MD5, which you still sometimes hear about in legacy contexts, they were designed to be incredibly fast. Great for checking if a big file download got corrupted.
Sure, you want that check to be quick.
But that speed is a huge liability for password storage. If an attacker steals a database full of just simple, raw password hashes, they can throw billions, literally billions of guesses at those hashes per second. They use specialized hardware, GPUs mostly. They aren't reversing the hash. They're just guessing and checking at blinding speed, way faster than the defenders anticipated.
Okay, so the defense has to somehow flip that speed advantage. We need to deliberately make the checking process slow for the attacker, but still manageable for the legitimate user.
Yes, exactly. We need techniques that intentionally require significant computational effort. That's the core principle behind modern key derivation functions, or
KDFs.
KDFs.
Right.
Functions like the ones that PBKDF2 or Argon2 are based on. They build resistance against these brute force guessing attacks using two main methods the sources point out.
The first one being adding randomness.
Correct. You vary the input to the hash using a unique random piece of data called a salt. And this is crucial. The salt must be unique for every single password you store, even if two users pick the exact same weak password, like password 133.
So their hashes will be different because the salts are different.
Exactly. When the server stores the hash, it stores the salt right alongside it. This one step completely defeats those rainbow tables, those huge pre-computed lists of common password hashes, because an attacker would need a separate rainbow table for every possible salt value, which just isn't feasible.
Okay, so salting kills the pre-computation attacks, but it doesn't stop an attacker from just guessing one password at a time really, really fast against a single stolen hash, right?
True. And that brings us to the second principle. Enforce computational work. KDFs deliberately add significant cost factors. They don't just hash the salted password once. They run the hashing process over and over again, thousands, maybe hundreds of thousands of times. This is called the iteration count.
So it makes the server work harder.
It makes everyone work harder to compute the hash. If it takes the server, say, half a second to verify one login attempt, that's perfectly fine for a user. They won't notice.
Right.
But if an attacker needs to spend that same half second for every single guess of the 50 billion guesses they plan to make, the cost suddenly becomes enormous. The time required blows up.
And if we look at the cutting-edge KDFs like Argon2, they go even further, don't they? It's not just about time, but also memory usage.
Exactly right. When you want really robust defense, you introduce memory hardness. The KDF function is designed so it needs a significant chunk of system RAM to even run.
Why does that help?
It makes it much harder for attackers to parallelize the attack using thousands of cheap, low-memory processing units like those found on GPUs. GPUs are great at doing lots of simple math really fast, but they usually don't have much memory per core. Memory hardness forces the attacker to use more expensive, high-memory systems, driving up their costs even more and slowing them down dramatically. This combination SALT, high iteration count, and memory hardness, that's really the bedrock of modern secure credential storage.
Okay, that gives us a pretty solid way to protect the secrets themselves, the passwords. But, if we spend all this effort securing the key to the castle, we better make sure the stuff inside the castle is also safe. Which brings us to the data itself, and this idea that just keeping it secret, confidentiality, isn't the whole story.
Not even close.
Here's where it gets really compelling for me. If data is secret, but it gets corrupted somehow, the results can be absolutely catastrophic. We have to ensure integrity, that it hasn't been changed, and authenticity, that it really came from who we think it came from. Because sometimes getting a bad secret message is far worse than getting a public message you know is real.
The risk profile changes completely when integrity is compromised. Think about data that's private, encrypted maybe, but gets silently changed. Maybe a bank account number in a financial transaction gets tweaked just slightly.
Oh, wow.
Or a command sent to an industrial control system gets altered. It could lead to total system failure or even physical damage. This is precisely why the field moved towards authenticated encryption, or AE, sometimes called AEAD, authenticated encryption with associated data.
Okay, AED, and that makes two guarantees at the same time, right?
Yes. It provides encryption, which is the confidentiality part we usually think of, and it provides message authentication. Authentication covers both integrity, proving the data hasn't been tampered with, and authenticity, proving it originated from the expected sender who knows the secret key.
How do you actually achieve both? Is it just running two algorithms?
Historically, cryptographers combined a cipher for the encryption part with a message authentication code, or MOC, for the integrity checking part. Now, the sources detail three main ways you can combine these two pieces, and the order you do things in is incredibly important. The security of the whole setup depends critically on how the MOC and the cipher interact, and crucially, that they always use different independent secret keys. Never reuse the same key for both encryption and the MAC.
Okay, different keys. Let's walk through those three combinations. Maybe start with the ones that aren't generally recommended anymore.
All right, first, there's encrypt and MAC. In this approach, you take the plain text, you encrypt it. Then, completely separately, you take the original plain text again and generate the MAC tag from that.
Okay, so two parallel operations on the original data.
Right, which can be fast because you can do them at the same time. But the downside is The recipient has to decrypt the ciphertext first before they can check the MAC against the now decrypted plaintext. That little window between decryption and verification can sometimes be exploited in certain attacks.
Okay. What's the second way?
The second is MA-then-encrypt. Here, you generate the MA tag from the plaintext first. Then you take the plaintext and the MAC tag you just made, and you encrypt them together.
That sounds kind of intuitive. You protect the MAC tag itself with encryption?
It does seem intuitive, but this scheme turned out to be highly vulnerable to certain types of attacks, particularly padding oracle attacks.
Oh, okay. Why is that vulnerable if we get into the technical weeds a bit?
Well, because the MAC is checked after decryption, and potentially after checking the padding used in the encryption, an attacker can sometimes send carefully crafted, slightly modified ciphertexts to the receiver. The receiver tries to decrypt. Depending on how the decryption fails, maybe it fails because the padding is wrong, maybe it fails later at the MAC check, the system might accidentally leak tiny bits of information, like an oracle. Over many attempts, attackers can use these subtle clues to figure out things about the plaintext, or sometimes even fully decrypt it without ever knowing the key, because the MA check happens too late in the process.
Wow. Okay, so that leaves the third option, which is presumably the best one.
Generally, yes. The most robust and widely recommended construction is encrypt-then-MAC.
Encrypt first, then MA.
Exactly. You encrypt the plaintext first, producing the ciphertext. Then you generate the authentication tag only from the resulting ciphertext, not the original plaintext.
Why is that better?
Because when the receiver gets the message, the very first thing they do is check the MAC tag against the ciphertext they received. If an attacker tampered with the ciphertext while it was in transit, the MAC check will fail immediately, right at the start. The system doesn't even attempt to decrypt if the MAC is bad. It just throws the message away.
Ah, so it minimizes the information leakage if it's been tampered with, right away, before you even try to look inside.
Precisely. It shuts down those oracle attacks we talked about. This structure is what makes modern AEAD modes, which are usually based on encrypt-then-MA, so effective and secure.
This whole idea of silent, undetected data corruption it's genuinely chilling. We've seen real-world examples, haven't we, in cyber conflict, where the attacker's goal wasn't just to steal data, but literally to destroy systems by corrupting them.
Absolutely. Look at the example cited in the sources. Malware, like the Kill Disk program. This wasn't some sophisticated spy tool trying to extract secrets quietly. Its entire purpose was destruction through corruption.
Just wipe everything.
Wipe the hard drives clean, overwrite critical boot sectors, essentially turning perfectly good computer hardware into useless bricks, inert piles of metal and plastic. We saw this kind of integrity attack used against targets like the Ukrainian power grid, parts of it, and also in the attack against Sony. The goal was pure disruption, causing operational chaos by destroying the integrity of the systems themselves.
And if we want the ultimate example of a precision integrity attack where the data wasn't just wiped but subtly manipulated, we have to talk about Stuxnet, right?
Stuxnet is the textbook case study for why data integrity is paramount when digital systems control physical processes. It targeted industrial control systems, specifically the SCADA systems managing centrifuges used in, sensitive nuclear programs.
And what it did was incredibly sophisticated.
It was. It didn't just crash the system. It used vulnerabilities to get inside, and then it subtly changed the commands being sent to the centrifuges, making them spin too fast and too slow, repeatedly stressing the physical hardware. But here's the truly insidious part.
The integrity failure.
Yes. While it was physically damaging the centrifuges, Stuxnet simultaneously falsified the sensor data being reported back to the human operators. It intercepted the real readings and replaced them with normal-looking data.
So the operators are looking at their control panels, and everything looks perfectly fine. Temperatures are normal, speeds are nominal, while behind the scenes, the actual machines are tearing themselves apart.
Exactly. The integrity of the reported information was completely compromised. The operators trusted their system's output, but that output was a carefully crafted lie, orchestrated by the malware. It's a stark reminder that integrity attacks targeting physical infrastructure can be far more devastating than just stealing data. If you can't trust the integrity of the commands you send or the data you receive back, you've lost control entirely.
It's crystal clear, then, that the integrity of our data and the security of our encryption hinges entirely on having secure, trustworthy keys to begin with. Which brings us neatly to Section 3. How do two people, let's call them Alice and Bob, actually establish a shared secret key if they start with nothing secret between them and they have to talk over an untrusted channel like the internet? This is the fundamental key distribution problem.
Right, and it starts with public key cryptography, asymmetric encryption. To talk securely to someone using their public key, you first need to get their authentic public key. But think about it. You connect to your bank, or Amazon.com, and their server sends you what it claims is its public key. How do you, the user, know that the key you just received is really Amazon's and not one swapped in by an attacker sitting in the middle?
Yeah, if you can't trust the key itself, the whole public key system kind of falls apart, doesn't it? It's essentially worthless without that initial trust.
Yeah.
Absolutely. If the key is fake, the entire secure session built upon it is compromised from the start. Now, the sources mention a clever technique for distributing public keys authentically, even using an insecure channel for the bulk transfer.
How does that work?
The idea is you can exchange the potentially very large public key file itself over the regular untrusted internet connection. That's fast and efficient. But then you communicate a much smaller piece of data specifically, a cryptographic hash of that public key, using a strong collision-resistant hash function over a separate, maybe slower, lower bandwidth channel, but one that you absolutely know is authentic.
Okay, so maybe you download the big key file from their website, but then you verify it by checking a short hash value that you received through, say, registered physical mail or read over a secure phone line from a trusted source.
Precisely. Or maybe the hash is published in a trusted newspaper or verified in person. You're using the small trusted channel to bootstrap trust and verify the integrity of the large key exchanged over the untrusted channel. It leverages the speed of the internet, but anchors the trust in a more secure, albeit perhaps slower, out-of-band mechanism.
That sets the stage for trusting static keys. Now let's talk about creating keys dynamically, literally out of nothing, using the Diffie-Hellman key agreement protocol.
Diffie-Hellman. It's elegant. It solves the problem of two parties creating a shared secret, a session key, completely on the fly, even if an eavesdropper hears everything they exchange publicly. It relies on the difficulty of a mathematical problem called the discrete logarithm problem.
How does it work in practice?
Alice and Bob first publicly agree on two large numbers, a prime number, Paler, which acts as the modulus, and another number, dead dollar, which is a generator. These talers and dollars are totally public. The attacker knows them too. Then Alice secretly chooses a large random number. Let's call it Toy. Bob secretly chooses his own large random number, Toy 12. These are their private secrets. They never share these.
Right.
Alice calculates her public value by computing Deller raised to the power of her secret modulo PB. So Bob does the same with his secret. He calculates GRBB. They then exchange these calculated public values over the insecure channel. The attacker sees these values.
Okay, so they swap GOBB and GRB. The attacker sees those, but not Toy or Kibi. Now what? How do they get the shared secret?
This is the clever part. Alice takes Bob's public value, GRB, which she just received, and she raises that value to the power of her own private secret, DRB. So she computes DRB. Mathematically, that simplifies to DRB raised to the power of DRB times RB.
Okay.
Bob does the mirror image. He takes Alice's public value in DRB and raises it to the power of his private secret, PRB time, which simplifies to the exact same thing, DRA times RB.
They both arrive at the exact same number, GRA Balaja, without ever having transmitted their individual secrets, $3 and $3.
Precisely. And because of the discrete logarithm problem, the eavesdropper, who only saw GRA and EDRA, cannot feasibly compute the final shared secret CRA. They need to figure out $3 or the other, which is believed to be computationally very hard for large enough numbers.
And this dynamic, on-the-fly nature of the secret key leads to a really important security property, doesn't it? Forward secrecy.
Yes, exactly. Forward and backward security. Because the random numbers $3 and Tenica are temporary, ephemeral, and used only for this one session, once the session ends, Alice and Bob should securely destroy their Garabaric and the resulting shared secret key, GRAHE.
Okay, so let's say an attacker breaks into Alice's computer later, maybe weeks later. They might steal her long-term private key, the one she uses for authentication, maybe. But because that Diffie-Hellman session key was temporary and is now gone,
they cannot use the compromised long-term key to go back in time and decrypt the old traffic from that session. That's backward security. The compromise doesn't unravel past communications.
and similarly for the future.
Right. As long as future sessions continue to use fresh, independent random numbers for Diffie-Hellman, compromising the long-term key doesn't automatically compromise future session keys either. That's forward security. This resilience against the later compromise breaking past or future sessions is why Diffie-Hellman, or usually its more efficient elliptic curve variants, ECDH, is absolutely fundamental to modern secure protocols like TLS, which secures HTTPS web traffic.
But there's always a but in security. The
Yeah.
basic, unauthenticated version of Diffie-Hellman is famously wide open to that classic attack,
Yeah.
the intruder in the middle, or MITM.
Yes. This is the absolute Achilles heel of unauthenticated key exchange. An attacker, let's call her Eve again, positions herself logically between Alice and Bob on the network. When Alice wants to start the exchange and sends her public value, GRA, towards Bob, Eve intercepts it. She doesn't pass it on. Instead, she generates her own secret random number, say $6, calculates dollar, and sends that to Bob, pretending it came from Alice.
Uh-oh.
And when Bob sends his public value, GRB, towards Alice, Eve intercepts that too. She generates another secret, Deardale, calculates dollar, and sends that to Alice, pretending it's from Bob.
So Alice thinks she's doing Diffie-Hellman with Bob using GR, but she's actually doing it with Eve. And Bob thinks he's doing it with Alice using dollars, but he's also doing it with Eve.
Exactly. Alice computes a shared key, which is actually GRA. That's a key shared only between Alice and Eve. Bob computes a shared key, GRAB, it's 5 GRA, that's a key shared only between Bob and Eve.
Wow. So Alice sends a message, encrypted with Care. Eve intercepts it, decrypts it with Careware, reads it, maybe changes it.
Then re-encrypts the message using the other key, K or Bill, and sends it on to Bob. Bob decrypts it with Terry-Weller and thinks it came securely and directly from Alice.
So connecting this to the bigger picture, Alice and Bob are blissfully unaware. They think they have a secure, end-to-end encrypted channel using all this fancy Diffie-Hellman math, but Eve is sitting right in the middle, reading, modifying, and forwarding everything, undetected.
It perfectly illustrates that elegant key generation protocols like Diffie-Hellman are fundamentally insecure on their own. They absolutely must be combined with robust authentication. You need a way to verify that the public values you received, GA-ZIO-EBP, genuinely belong to the person you think you're talking to. Usually this is done by having Alice and Bob digitally sign their Diffie-Hellman public values using their long-term trusted private keys. Without that authentication layer, dynamic key exchange is just an open invitation for MITM attacks.
Okay, that really sets up the theoretical underpinnings of trust and key exchange. Now, let's pivot to Section 4. How do organizations actually manage all these secrets in the real world and weave them into their overall system architecture? This seems to start with identifying and protecting what the sources sometimes call the crown jewels.
Right, the crown jewels. It's a common term for those absolutely critical pieces of information or credentials that, if they get exposed, give an attacker significant power almost immediately. We're talking about things like database connection strings with passwords in them, internal configuration secrets like encryption keys, and, very commonly, application API keys.
Like the example in the source about needing a subscription key just to make a query to the Bing search API.
Exactly. That key isn't just for access. It's tied to billing. If that key leaks, someone else could use it, rack up huge charges on your account, or abuse the service under your identity. Losing that kind of secret can be instantly catastrophic.
And often the way these things leak isn't through some super sophisticated hack, but just simple oversight, right? Like developer mistakes.
Absolutely, happens all the time. Best practices put a huge emphasis on preventing accidental exposure. You see it constantly where debugging features meant only for testing environments, things like really verbose logging that might print out secrets, or special administrative web pages get accidentally left turned on or somehow exposed when the application is deployed to the live production environment. Those debug flags or endpoints can inadvertently reveal internal paths, server details, or sometimes the secrets themselves in plain text.
So, assuming we try to avoid those coding mistakes, how do the underlying operating systems help provide a layer of defense architecturally if an attacker does manage to get some initial foothold inside a system?
Well, the most fundamental defense layer is built around compartmentalization and access control. In traditional UNIX-like systems, it starts with the basics. Every running program, every process, has a user ID, UID, and one or more group IDs, GIDs associated with it. And every file and resource has permissions set based on UID and GID.
Okay, so a program running as a regular user like Jano can't just go and modify critical system files owned by the root super user.
Correct, that's the first level. Then you have mechanisms like setuid or setgid programs. These are special, usually small and carefully written utilities. When a normal user runs a setuid program owned by root, the program executes temporarily with root's privileges, but only to perform one specific, necessary task, like letting the user change their own password, which requires modifying a root-owned file or mounting a file system. Then it drops privileges again immediately.
But as systems get bigger and more complex, just having user versus root often isn't fine-grained enough, is it? If an attacker compromises one big application process, say a web server running as a generic www data user, that user might still have access to way too many things.
That's the classic problem, yeah.
Yeah.
Lateral movement. If one part of a big monolithic application or OS component gets compromised, the attacker often inherits all the permissions of that component, which might be quite broad, allowing them to move sideways and attack other parts of the system. This is why deeper operating system compartmentalization is so important, breaking down functionality and assigning only the absolute minimum privileges needed for each specific task. The source mentioned trusted Solaris as an older example of an OS designed explicitly around this principle of least privilege.
Can you give a more concrete example of how that kind of role-based breakdown would work in practice?
Sure. Imagine instead of just having a generic admin user who can do everything, you break down system tasks into highly specific roles. Let's take system logging. You might define two distinct roles, a log writer and a log manager. The process responsible for actually writing log messages would run under the log writer role. This role would be granted the absolute bare minimum permissions needed. Maybe only the permission to append new lines to a specific set of log files in var log. Critically, the log writer role would be explicitly denied any permissions to delete log files, override existing log entries, or even read logs written by other processes.
So it can only add, never change, or remove.
Exactly. Then you'd have a separate, highly privileged utility that runs under the log manager role. Only this role would have the permissions needed to rotate the log files, archive them, perhaps analyze them, or delete old logs.
Ah, I see. So if an attacker manages to compromise the process that's just writing the logs, the log writer.
The worst they could do is maybe fill the logs with garbage by appending nonsense. They absolutely cannot erase their own tracks by deleting log entries, nor can they modify past log history. It dramatically limits the damage they can do and makes forensic analysis much easier.
That principle of least privilege and fine-grained compartmentalization sounds incredibly powerful from a security perspective, but it must add a ton of complexity to actually designing and managing the system, right?
Oh, absolutely. It does.
Yeah.
The complexity of defining all those roles and policies, ensuring they're enforced correctly, and dealing with the potential performance overhead of the system, constantly checking these fine-grained permissions, it's significant. But it's often seen as a necessary trade-off to shrink the blast radius if one component does get compromised. It's the same core idea driving modern architectural patterns like containerization and microservices, trying to isolate each piece of functionality as much as possible.
This brings us back to that recurring tension, doesn't it? Between the theoretical strength of a security concept and the messy reality of implementing it. It feels like this constant arms race where the offense, the attackers, often have an advantage because finding one flaw in a complex implementation is easier than making the entire complex implementation perfectly secure.
It really is an arms race. And we see this trade-off play out constantly, especially in areas where performance is critical. For instance, to squeeze out every last drop of speed, some critical system components or libraries might be written directly in handwritten assembly language instead of a higher-level language like C or Rust.
Why is that a security trade-off?
Well, writing in assembly gives you ultimate control and potentially the best performance, but it completely bypasses all the safety nets and automated checks that modern compilers and tools provide. Things like stack canaries, address sanitizers, bounds checking these tools operate at a higher level and can automatically detect or prevent common programming errors like buffer overflows or use after free bugs.
So if you write in assembly, you're giving up those automatic protections.
You are. You're taking on the full responsibility of writing perfectly correct, perfectly secure code manually. And history shows that's incredibly difficult for humans to do reliably. So the performance gain might come at the cost of introducing subtle, hard-to-find vulnerabilities that a compiler might have caught. It's that constant balancing act between speed, complexity, and verifiable safety.
You know, we hear from cybersecurity veterans sometimes that they feel like they're stuck in a time loop. The specific exploits change, but the underlying types of vulnerabilities they're dealing with today often feel like variations on the same systemic problems they were fighting 10 or 20 years ago.
That really speaks to the nature of this arms race. Technology evolves, new software gets built, new systems come online, but the attackers just adapt their tools to exploit fundamental structural weaknesses that persist.
Yeah.
Given this ongoing struggle, there's a noticeable push in the industry, reflected in things like the CSO Compass framework mentioned in the sources, to move away from extremely rigid, highly prescriptive security controls.
Towards principles instead.
Yes, exactly. Focusing on foundational security principles like ensure strong multi-factor authentication, or implement robust network segmentation, or maintain least privilege, rather than dictating incredibly specific, detailed checklists of exactly how to implement something. Why? Because those highly prescriptive checklists are brittle. As the source notes, they can become quickly outdated as technology shifts rapidly, like the massive move to cloud infrastructure. Principles endure, specific rules expire.
Principles adapt, checklists get stale.
That's a good way to put it. Security isn't some static state you achieve by ticking boxes on a compliance form. It's a continuous, active process of managing complexity, anticipating threats, and constantly striving to build systems based on those sound architectural foundations.
This has been a tremendously detailed deep dive. We've really gone through the practical layers of defensive crypto. We covered why simple password hashing fails and the need for key derivation function principles. We looked at authenticated encryption and why just encrypting isn't enough. You need integrity and authenticity. And we explored the critical role of properly authenticated key establishment and system architecture like compartmentalization.
Yeah, I think the core takeaway is that effective defensive cryptography is always a layered strategy. It goes way beyond just picking a strong encryption algorithm. You have to actively make things computationally difficult for attackers trying to guess secrets. You absolutely must guarantee the authenticity and integrity of data, not just its secrecy. And you need to use solid architectural principles like compartmentalization and least privilege to contain the damage when inevitably some part of the defense fails.
So we'll leave you, our listeners, with a final provocative thought building on all this. We've heard how the defense often struggles to keep pace with the offense and how the sheer complexity of our systems can undermine even strong cryptographic code. If you step back and look at your own organization's security, or even your personal digital security, how much of it truly relies on the inherent mathematical strength of the crypto primitives themselves, versus how much relies on process, policy, user awareness, incident response plans, backups, and all the human and procedural elements wrapped around the technology. Where does the real resilience lie? Thank you for joining us for this deep dive into securing the digital world. We look forward to the next one.